It's our pleasure, and I am speaking on behalf of this institution. My name is Valentina Dediu. It is our pleasure to host this meeting, as it was to host you all this week. We have to thank, first of all, to Bogdan, who not only organized impeccably, I might say, from our part this meeting, but he was our hero, fulfilling a most regrettable absence, that of Professor Wöllers. Unfortunately, he being sick, could not attend this meeting in Bucharest. So thank you very much for that. You are here in this Romanian Institute for Advanced Study, as we see without modesty, a unique institution in Romania. You are here on a sort of a Swiss ground, because this house belongs to a foundation Swiss and Romanian. You are here among humanities and social sciences. Law maybe was not a favorite discipline, but was existent in our 26 years of history. Bogdan is proof, a living proof of this. I don't want to keep you from the most interesting part of this afternoon. I would just like to ask Mr. David Alders, coming from the Mercator Stiftung, to tell you something about the project and the configuration of this project, and then the floor will belong to Bogdan. Thank you very much again for your visit here and for the work done.
Thank you very much, Valentina, for this introduction, and of course for hosting this event. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here in this wonderful room. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, dear fellows and seminar participants, for coming, and also a warm welcome from my side. My name is David Alders. I'm a project manager at Stiftung Mercator. This event takes place in the context of the reconstitution project, and Stiftung Mercator funds this project. And I'd like to use the opportunity to say a few words on Stiftung Mercator, about Stiftung Mercator, but also, of course, on the reconstitution project. So just briefly, Stiftung Mercator is a private foundation based in the German city of Essen, and we are primarily a funding organization, and we do so for four thematic areas, which are climate change, integration, arts education, and Europe. And this project is part of our activities in the Europe section. The broad, or admittedly very broad, goal of our activities in the Europe section is to contribute to a more cohesive and cooperative Europe, and we have done so in many areas and policy fields, including European migration policy, European climate policy, European foreign policy, and also the question of the European public sphere. And we do so through funding academic research, think tanks, and supporting civil society organizations. And about 2 years ago, we were approached by partners and also felt ourselves that we needed to turn to issues related to the rule of law and democracy in Europe. These are two of the most elementary principles and values of the European Union, and they are fundamental to European cooperation and mutual trust. They have, as you all know, come under attack in many places, or at least under pressure, and these attacks can take very different forms. We've seen the independence of courts restricted, opposition rights curtailed, civil society infrastructure in a way weakened, or corruption in different branches of government. So at the beginning of this reconstitution project stood the will to do something against these developments and to somehow react. And I have to say, and I don't think it comes as a surprise, we've struggled in a way to find answers to the questions on what can be done and what can we do, especially as a private foundation in such a, in a way, contested and complex and also very sensitive area. But after a longer process of consultation with Christoph Möllers also, and with our partners, Forum Transregionale Studien and Democracy Reporting International, which is a think tank in Berlin, we came up with the Reconstitution Project, and broadly speaking, we want to do at least two things with the project. First, we want to establish a forum for dialogue, genuine dialogue on these issues. We want to invite academics and practitioners from all over Europe to establish an open debate on core concepts of democracy and the rule of law and challenges to them. And ideally, this should take place across borders, across disciplines, and also across the political spectrum. We hope this will, in a way, contribute to a debate that is not characterized by finger pointing or something, but constitutes a serious attempt at mutual understanding. And second, we want to contribute to a more fact-based and nuanced public debate by providing analysis that is sharp and also accessible to a broader public, and we work with journalists throughout Europe to inform the public debate. These are, of course, very broad and ambitious aims. There's a lot more to be said, I think, but I will leave it at this. And I'd like to thank those who constitute this program. This is Lisa and Dorit from Forum Transregionale Studien. And thank you for the fantastic organization here, also for organizing the travels of everyone coming to Bucharest. Thank you to Jakob from Democracy Reporting. And thank you, of course, to the fellows and the seminar participants. And then once more, thank you to NEC, of course, for hosting the program during the last few days, not only tonight, but during the last few days. And thank you, Bogdan once more, for not only chairing this session, but organizing this session. And thank you, everybody, for taking part in this roundtable. So lastly, Reconstitution, the project is in a way a very collaborative endeavor from the very beginning, very European, and it tries to combine legal scholarship, legal practice, and also the public. And I guess today's event is an expression of this, and I very much look forward to it, to learning a lot more about the situation in Romania. And with this, I hand over to you, Bogdan. Thank you very much.
The panel today has the title Judicial Independence and the Judicial Council Model, Conformities, Convergence, Tension. Why? Because there is a conformity towards exporting the Judicial Council model in newer democracy. There is an established trend in that direction, supported, for example, by the Venice Commission, Consultative Council of European Judges, the European Commission. So the Judicial Council model that initially was peripheral in Europe. No? It was called the French-Italian model, meaning the judicial self-government by a judicial council composed of at least half the membership, judges, and sometimes also prosecutors elected by their peers. It started in France and Italy, then Portugal and Spain. It was also called the Mediterranean model. With the exportation of this model, of course, comes convergence, because something that initially was peripheral, now in the EU 27. In the EU 27 is the rule. The majority of the countries have judicial councils. No? But with the judicial council come benefits, but also tensions. Tensions exist in the initial jurisdiction, in Italy with fractionalization of the judiciary, politicization according to ideological lines in the Quarenti. So in most countries you can see the vivid debates in Poland about the council model. Now, the Romanian council is an epitome of the council model, because not just half of the membership, but the overwhelming majority of the 90 members of the Superior Council of Magistracy are either magistrates ex officio or judges and prosecutors elected by their peers. So we're going to have a very interesting discussion about this. I'll present the panelists in the seating order, not in the speaking order. So, to my right, one of the most vivid voices in our civil society environment, Laura Ștefan. Of course, to the Romanian audience, there will be no introduction, but the majority of the participants are not Romanian, so an introduction is needed in this case. She was also director in the Ministry of Justice in the period of essential reforms for consolidating the rule of law in Romania. And then to my left is Chief Assistant Magistrate Karoly BENKE. Assistant magistrates in the Romanian system are assimilated to judges. So, and they're appointed for life, which means that constitutional justices come and go, but they stay. Then Professor Lucian, who teaches in the area of international public law. He's also a practicing barrister in the bar of Timișoara. Then Professor ALISTAR was one of the two civil society representatives in the Romanian Superior Council of the Magistracy. Then Judge Andrea, she's a judge of the Court of Appeals of Cluj. There are 15 courts of appeals in Romania, remember, so that's judicial elite. And then we have another judicial elite representative. She's also a member of the current Superior Council of the Magistracy. Then we have Judge Horatius from the Court of Appeals of Târgu Mureș. He was a member of the Superior Council of the Magistracy. He was also a president. But without further ado, let's start with the presentations. I will ask my colleagues to keep the presentations to about 15 minutes so that we have enough time for discussion and we can follow the with the reception immediately afterwards. Well, give or take. Give or take. So we'll start with the Chief Assistant Magistrate, Dr. BENKE, who will speak to us about constitutional education.
Thank you for your invitation. I accepted your invitation because I knew that this subject would be very interesting. It's very actual. It is very debated in the Romanian society. And we have to recognize that there was social and institutional unrest concerning this subject. I will try to speak about the Constitutional Court case law on the independence of justice. But first of all, I have to emphasize that 2018 was a very interesting year in our constitutional development. I tried to see in the 90s or immediately after 2000 how many decisions of the Constitutional Court were expressly on independence of justice. And it seems to me that there were some years in which we had 2 or 3 more important decisions. But I think that there are no more than 10 decisions that are important till 2010. From 2010, there are some reforms in 2012 that generated 2 or 3 decisions of the Constitutional Court, but it does not compare with 2018, when, as you may know, there were 3 legislative initiatives that aimed to modify 3 fundamental laws regarding statute the judges, prosecutors, the judicial organization, and the statute of the Superior Council of Magistracy. But chronologically, first of all, I try to identify in the Constitutional Court case law a conceptual delimitation between a judge and a prosecutor. Everybody knows that the Romanian Constitution does not speak about powers, so you don't have as titles in the Constitution legislative power, executive power, and judicial power, but you have legislative authority, executive authority, and judicial authority. And what is interesting that a text in the Constitution, Article 1 of the Constitution, speaks about powers. There is a decision number 3, but 1983, and the Constitutional Court says something like, lato sensu, a judicial power means all the entity that has a jurisdictional activity. So it was a very broad definition, but this broad definition is, let's say, reversed by decision 96/96, when the court explicitly says that judicial power belongs only to courts. Only the judge has a jurisdiction, not the prosecutors. Only the judges have independence, not the prosecutors. The prosecutors are hierarchically subordinated. They have a functional autonomy. Of course, in law 304/2004, there is a provision that says that the prosecutor has independence as regards the case he has to solve. But I think it's more a functional autonomy than independence. And you will see that in decision 633/2018, the court explicitly explains the random distribution of causes. So as regards prosecution, you do not have this principle. You cannot normativize this principle because the prosecutor is hierarchically subordinated. And that's why you cannot have let's say, impartial, you cannot have this, all the guarantees of the judges, of the independence of judges as regards prosecutors. And here I want to point out that you have the objective impartiality of the prosecutor. Hierarchical control excludes this. Another case that was very discussed was the role of the Ministry of Justice. Of course, the role of the Ministry of Justice as regards prosecutors. I won't enter into details, but I point out two decisions, 45 from 2018 and 358 per 2018, for the role of the Ministry of Justice in the appointment of the high-ranking prosecutors. As I mentioned, we have in 2012 a amendment to law 304, I think, for 2008 on the judicial organization and on the yes, 304, and it was for the Constitutional Court a very good occasion to make some statements about the independence of judge. And I liked very much something like the constituent power has established the independence of judge to defend him or her from the influence of the political authorities, and in particular to the executive power. However, this guarantee cannot be construed as causing the judge's lack of responsibility. The Constitution expressly says that the judges are independent and subject only to the law. To be subject only to the law is not meant law in a stricto sensu, but in a very broad sense. In a very broad sense, it means to respect, to comply with the Constitutional Court's decisions. In 2012, we had this case in which it was an a priori constitutional review, in which the court had to adjudicate upon, let's say, the obligation of the courts, of the judges, to respect Constitutional Court decisions, and if you do not respect the Constitutional Court decision, that was a disciplinary matter. And the court says, yes, it is okay, it is constitutional to obey to the law, and the law means a decision of the Constitutional Court too. Another interesting definition, let's say, upon the independence of judges, says the Constitutional Court. The independence of judges is not regulated as an end in itself, and even less, is not a privilege for the judges, but serving the justice is a guarantee offered to the citizens. And I have to say that another decision, 873/2010, which concerned the, let's say, the retiring system of the judges, the court says when we assess independence of justice, we have an institutional component. So the concept of independence of judge is not referring exclusively to judges, but it covers the entire judicial system. And we have an individual component, and the individual component concerns only the judge. About the status of judges, 2015, we have a decision that says commercial activities cannot characterize and complement the status of the magistrates. The legislature designating a whole system of rights and obligations regarding magistrates. And this whole system ensures both the functional and financial independence of the judges. Another challenge for the independence of judges was saying that the Constitutional Court applies the living law doctrine. Recently, I mentioned two decisions, one from 2011 and another from 2020. But recently, in this decision, which is unpublished, the Constitutional Court had to answer to the following question. If the High Court of Cassation delivers a decision that is in the unitary application of law, that is contrary to the law, that means the Constitutional Court can intervene, can declare it unconstitutional. And the answer was yes, because I have to make, as a Constitutional Court, a two-step analysis, a two-step review. When I'm thinking about diritto vivente, first of all, I have to see that norm, how is applied by the courts. And how is applied, it is the first step. I have to assess the meaning of that norm. And the second, if that norm, as applied by the court, is or not constitutional. In this case, so 51 for 2020, the Constitutional Court remained at the first step, because in the first step it noticed that the decision of the High Court was not compliant with the law. But what is interesting that because we do not have this competence, express competence to state unconstitutional, to declare unconstitutional the decision of the High Court, we declared the unconstitutionality of the law as interpreted by the Supreme Court. I think that there is no encroachment, no infringement of the independence of justice when the court applies the diritto vivente doctrine in assessing the normative content of the norm under constitutional review. And in 2018, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, we have a lot of decisions. I think around 10 or 15 decisions delivered in that year regarding judges, prosecutors, judicial organization, Supreme Court, the Supreme Council of Magistracy. I will point out some very interesting note of mine on the first decision that was, I think, of a fundamental importance in our normative development as regards independence of justice. First of all, this is decision 45 for 2018. First of all, there was a text. So this decision was delivered in an a priori constitutional review. First of all, the text under review said, judges and prosecutors are obliged in the exercise of their duties to refrain from defamatory expression or expressing themselves in any way against the other powers of the state, legislative or executive. It was criticized, this text, oh, it is against independence of justice. But the court answers, independence of judiciary does not mean an absolute freedom of the judge to express and manifest himself according to arbitrary criteria, but with the respect of the duty of discretion. And of course, when we are speaking about representative of judges or prosecutors, they can have, of course, a public speech. And in this public speech, of course, they have to follow some same coordinates within the limits and according to the law to express themselves. Their public positions can differ, but at the same time, they must be animated by institutional respect that must characterize the activity of any state official. Another three interesting ideas from the Constitutional Court case law. You know, there was a provision of the law that permitted to judges and prosecutors to be temporarily assigned in the executive power or almost in any state entities. And the Constitutional Court came and said, no, it is unconstitutional. It is against the independence and the image of the judiciary to have prosecutors or judges temporarily assigned, let's say, to the Interior Ministry, to the External, to the Foreign Affairs Ministry. No, you have to be in the system, because if you are a judge, you have to judge, and if you are a prosecutor, there is you have to prosecute. There was a practice that a person, a judge or a prosecutor, can be appointed as, for example, Secretary of State, or an official, and a dignitary of state. The court says, no, this is an incompatibility, you cannot do this. So for the moment after this Constitutional Court decision, it is possible this temporary assignment only to the Ministry of Justice and to the Supreme Council of Magistracy, Superior Council of Magistracy, and I think the National Institute for Magistracy, and I think that's all. Another interesting point in the Constitutional Court decision about the appointment of the President, Vice President, President of the section of the High Court of Cassation and Justice. Till 2018, the appointments was made by the President of the Republic. And after this decision of the Constitutional Court ruled that the appointment has to be made by the Superior Council of Magistracy, as Superior Council of Magistracy is the guarantee of the independence of justice. And there is a perfect match from this argument of the courts to the constitutional text. There was a huge debate in our case law about state liability in case of judicial error, and in what conditions the state can sue the judge or the prosecutor for this judicial error. There were, first of all, in 45, we said unconstitutional, the new amendment. There was another decision, 252. We said, again, it is unconstitutional. And only for the third time, we agreed with the Parliament that the new formula is respected by the Constitution. So it was a huge saga that I think there was, for 1 year. Another aspect tackled in our decision was the relegation of the judge or the prosecutor to an inferior functional position. The critiques were in the sense that once the judge and the prosecutor has a certain rank, he cannot be relegated to an inferior rank as a disciplinary measure. But the Constitutional Court agreed that he or she can be relegated because, you know, you have to have a gradual step to in all these disciplinary measures, and the court accepted that this is constitutional. I will speak about legal conflicts of constitutional nature. Recently, the Constitutional Court experienced some very interesting cases regarding the composition of judicial panels at the Supreme Court. And everybody, so I think not everybody, but there were rumors that somehow the Constitutional Court can affect the independence of judiciary by solving these legal conflicts. But I have to disappoint you because it is not a new thing in our jurisprudence case law. It dates back from 2008 when we had the first time to assess on a conflict between the Supreme Court and the President of the Republic. In that case, 1222, there was compliance of the Supreme Court to a Constitutional Court decision, and the President of the Republic was obliged to act contrary to a Constitutional Court decision. And the Constitutional Court said no, he cannot be obliged against a Constitutional Court decision. In 2009, the Constitutional Court found another legal conflict of constitutional nature between the Supreme Court and the Parliament, because the Supreme Court, through two decisions which tackle the unitary application of the law, gave birth, let's say, to two new norms, legal norms. So there was he breached his competence and infringed the competence of the Parliament. It was something about the salarization, the remuneration of the judges. And let's see, in decision 685 for 2018, when the Constitutional Court ruled that there was a legal conflict of constitutional nature because at the level of the Supreme Court, a panel of judges, that were a panel that was adjudicating in the last instance, especially in criminal matters, was not composed according to the law. The law said 5 judges has to be drawn lots, all the 5 members, but in practice and in the administrative practice of the High Court, the Supreme Court, only 4 from the 5 members were drawn lots, and 1 was invariably the same. The Supreme Court President, the Vice President of the Supreme Court, or a President of the section, the criminal section. Here the Constitutional Court created a very theory of the legal paradigm. So it was a legal paradigm that was created by the Supreme Court in 2012, I think, and was that way it is a legal paradigm because it was accepted by the society, even if this legal paradigm was contrary to the law. And the Constitutional Court said that it infringed the Constitution. Another interesting decision, it was another conflict of constitutional nature generated by some cooperation protocols between the public ministry and the intelligence services. I point out only one idea from this decision, that the courts were put in a typical situation. They did not know the provisions of the protocol, given its secret character, and reasonably didn't have a normative framework under which to carry out an effective verification of the way in which the evidences were obtained. So in this conflict, the courts were part of the conflict, but part, it says that their competence was breached by this protocol. And finally, the last decision that I want to point out, to speak about it, is decision 417 from 2019. It's about the specialized judicial panels at the level of the Supreme Court in corruption-related cases. So the law provided that you have to have, in the first instance, such panels. In practice, there were not organized such panels, and in 2019, the Supreme Court said that all the panels are specialized in corruption-related matters. The Constitutional Court accepted this for 2019, but it said that there was a conflict of judicial nature between 2003 and 2019, because the Supreme Court created also a legal paradigm that was contrary to the Constitution. And the court in 2019 and in 2018, so the panel of 5 judges and these panels of specialized judges, expressly said that the court was not provided by the law, but by judicial and administrative practice. So thank you. This was my let's say short presentation about Constitutional Court case law related to the judicial branch, and especially focused on judicial independence. Thank you.
Thank you. Because we are pressed for time today, we won't make any transitions or comments, so we will still gather all the presentations, all the talks, and then we're going to have hopefully about 1 hour for discussion. So I give the floor to Dr. for the start.
I'm going to start through thank you for inviting me here. So thank you, Professor IANCU, thank you, your college. I'm going to propose to you a general picture, and sometimes old stuff are also new stuff. Sometimes we need to refresh ourselves and go to the very basic to try to create a good shape for concrete discussions. In many well-known international sources, we do see independence and accountability as being two linked concepts. And therefore, we have to look to those in order to understand the role of judicial councils, as long they are also in charge, in Romania at least, with defending independence and justice, and also having, as Professor IANCU mentioned, the role of self-governing power. Those two concepts approach in different international standards in two ways. One way is to have a debate as competing concepts. What's most important, independence of justice or accountability of justice for society, for democratic and constitutional life of any country? Is any primary principle acting against the other one or not? So this is the approach of competing concepts. The other one is to have two sides of the same coin, meaning is a meta-concept which integrates both of them. And in line with that, we have to understand a bit how the international standards are trying to present those two principles. And I have to mention that in the beginning of my presentation, I was looking to International Commission of Jurists practical guide for independence and accountability. Also, Bogdan principles, Transparency International Rule on Corruption Report 2007, and Venice Commission Report 2009 on independence of justice. I was looking to the part 1, which is dedicated to judges. So we are looking in all those sources with more or less the same words. Of course, some of them coming from positivism in legal science, in other cases coming from the source of justice as being own source. We have two contexts. One is related to functional independence, which is actually the dynamic between branches of power and how they are balancing one each other in order to create that institutional harmony to rule our societies and to reach the three expectations, which is rule of law, sustainable development, and quality of life. And this perspective is also related to what we heard previously, the relationship between executive and judiciary, legislative and judiciary, who has the primary role and how they are cooperating with each other in the lower cooperation. Another dimension is a dimension related to discretionary decision-making in justice, meaning the rights of judges to decide independently by any other any undue interference in their decision-making process. And this is very large because interference might come from other branches of power, might come from media, might come from judicial system itself internally, and we have means and ways to create unjustified pressure on judges when they are ruling, or on prosecutors when they are doing their investigations, when they are prosecuting. Also, when we are talking about judicial accountability, we have to think about, again, two levels. One is concrete accountability upon the verdicts. That means what you have decided, what kind of consequences created, related to parties, related to law, related to stability of legal system. And we saw in Romania conflicts between High Court of Justice and Constitutional Court in their appreciations of law. We saw fragmentary judicial practice between courts and so on. And also accountability of justice related to the very profound role of justice to maintain a good spirit in society, a society which is governed by the rule of law, where all provisions and all common values are imposed through judiciary according with what the law is saying. If one law provides wrong provisions, or society evolve, we need first to change the law and then to apply the law, not to disregard the law through judicial decisions. We have, for example, the situation of decriminalization of sexual relationship between persons of the same gender, which was a crime during the communist period. Of course, the social reality in a democratic society, in an inclusive society, imposed to change the law. And that's the way, not disregarding the law based on principles, at least not in a civil law system. In a common law system, yes, courts verdicts represent the law themselves. And then we have to look to key issues according with promised remission, and we are looking to few aspects. One is magistrate's career. How we are ensuring a fair process, a fair criteria, predictable decision-making process related to magistrate's career. Because we know you can infringe the independence of magistrates through those kind of unlegitimate conditionalities related to their career. Therefore, for example, it's a bad example in the Romanian legal system of avoiding hiring prosecutors through a political decision between Minister of Justice, doesn't matter who is that person, and President of the Republic, doesn't matter again who is that person, with a just consultative opinion of Judicial Council, which according with the Constitution has the duty to preserve the independence of the judicial system. We heard about judicial power, it's exercised by courts, but also when it's about judicial decisions which might affect freedom, fundamental freedoms and liberties, also prosecution needs to be looked at. So therefore, in a wise way, in Romanian legislation, judges and prosecutors are both magistrates because the consequences of their decisions are very significantly on basic freedom and liberties. So one aspect is related to career. Another aspect is related to disciplinary practice. And it's important to ensure a fair and predictable criteria and process in applying them. We will see that the other side of the coin, when actually disciplinary actions are not taken by the Judicial Council, creating impunity to wrongdoing within judiciary, which sooner or later ends in reducing the trust of society in justice and in judicial system. And also it's related by balanced powers between prosecutors and judges within criminal process, but I'm not going to stay too much into that aspect. When it's about magistrates, few perceptions which are largely presented into society are related to the following aspects. Romanian civil society wants to have independent judiciary, with no any particular executive or legislative power interference with judiciary in terms of interfering with their discretionary power decision making in law enforcement. Also, society calls upon a balanced accountability. Of course, it's important to have independent judges and prosecutors, but also we have to have accountable judges and prosecutors related to how they are carrying out their duties. And we had a scandal last year related to failure of criminal justice to stop the phenomenon of human being trafficking and proxenetism cases and so on. And starting from one emblematic case, which have been very well covered in media, of course, have been revealed many other cases around the country where actually judicial authorities failed in performing proper duty in regards to that aspect. Another subject is related to impunity, judicial impunity. Sometimes independence is perceived as a way to take away any kind of disciplinary or criminal responsibility for misconduct or for abuses, which is wrong. If you have isolated cases of abuses, you need to sort out them without any doubt. Because otherwise, the general public will perceive that this is kind of a generalized approach to cover up all those wrongdoings, which is not necessarily healthy for the trust in justice. Another subject which is largely debated in Romanian society, it's about payment and the whole packages of guarantees for the magistrate status. And I have to say here, unfortunately, this subject is very populistic approach because the package magistrates has, it's not their personal benefit, it's the benefit of the position they are carrying out. It's part of the package which ensure us guarantees that magistrates are independent economically, not only in terms of decision making, and they are looking exclusively to our issues, not necessarily to day after tomorrow and the living standards for after tomorrow. But this is unfortunately largely used in public debate. Why? Because this is at the same time with low level of trust. And this approach finds lots of fuel in the public debate, again in a populistic way. Another subject is misunderstanding of independence as right to promote fragmentary judicial practice. We have cases where judges, because they are independent, they are thinking according with their own values related to different aspects which are subject to be ruled, and they are coming with different court verdicts on very similar cases. And sometimes this is really dangerous for the trust in justice. And of course, the selective justice claim. Mostly in media, in Romanian media, the debate is related to abuses, but I think the important debate should be also related to the cover-ups in the prosecution. And then, if you have this kind of selective justice in a polarized society, as actually is happening in all Europe, you will tend to believe that justice is instrumentalized. Regarding the legislation, I'll just name them. Causes for affecting the independence, but also the accountability of justice, because you cannot be accountable if, for example, you have incoherent legislative framework. Of course, that will lead to incoherent judicial practice. Unconstitutional judicial proceedings, and we heard about in the previous presentation. I'll give you an example related to the role of justice in society as a very basic aspect. European Court of Human Rights, it says in Article 10 that we all have and enjoy freedom of expression. Anyway, in the paragraph 2 of the same article, it's clearly stated that this freedom of expression should be balanced by a few aspects which are related to public interest, to other people's rights, and so on. In the Romanian Civil Code, we have a provision if, for example, some person is offended, that person is legitimate to call for damage compensation related to non-patrimonial rights. However, the judicial practice in Romania embraces only the Article 10, paragraph 1, without looking to the balance between rights and to create an equilibrium. We end up in a very violent environment in terms of language violence, not only language violence, in media, in social media, and so on, which actually affects a lot the climate of exchange of ideas and arguments in Romanian society. Why? Because actually it's one thing in law and it's another thing in society. And when justice has been asked to rule on this balance between rights, end up in an unbalanced approach. Therefore, for a judicial council, I would say we have to look to the independence and accountability as the sides of the same coin. They are not competing concepts. And I think the councils needs to look to the personal independence affected by internal factors, and they have to have a predictable career and disciplinary practice. When it's about personal independence affected by external factors, to defend personal independence depends in a very vigorous way. When it's about personal independence betrayed by magistrates, it's important to monitor the state supervision of magistrates' restrictions, because sometimes they themselves are putting in the situation not to fulfill the status of magistrates, overstepping into public arena. Functional independence, we need to take the budget from hands of Ministry of Justice into hands of the Judicial Council, because it's a way of holding pressure on courts by executive power. When it's about accountability, we need to reduce fragmentary judicial practice. We need to sort out the issues related to illegal practices in running proceedings. And we need to reduce the selective justice phenomena, which is perceived very negatively by society. And also we need to look to another aspect, quality of justice as a public service. And as long as the Supreme Council of Justice, its governing body of justice, needs also to have an eye on this aspect, not only on the magistrate status and secondary legislation for courts functioning, but also regarding the effective good management, good governance into the courts. And I'm going to end right now with two questions for the audience, just to reflect on. Why is the judicial immunity perceived as judicial evil in general? Because this is misconception, and we need to find a good narrative to fight with. And the second one is, does the Supreme Council of Justice have any responsibility for the low trust in justice, as long declared himself, and also actually is declared by law as being self-governing and self-regulating body of the judiciary? Then has to take credit, but has to take criticism, has to take rights, but has to take also responsibilities. Thank you.
Let's go now to the good judges. Let's ask them how independent they think they should be, and to whom, respectively how accountable, and to whom.
My topic is factionalism in the Judicial Council and in the judiciary, causes and consequences. Why this topic now? I've been a judge for 25 years now, and I've experienced different opinions on major topics in the judiciary and the High Council, in the High Council many times. So why this topic now? I think now I feel that the executive and the legislator use our different opinions to carry out some reforms against us, trying to control us, trying to limit our independence. This is the reason for I wanted to figure out what are the causes, why have we many voices on the same topic in such sensitive times, what are the consequences and what should we do? Do we have remedies for this? Trying to figure out the cause. I think the cause was the reform initiated by the leading party 3 years ago, and I think we've never experienced in the judiciary such an opposition to a reform. Do we need it? A reform in the judiciary after 10 years of being members of the European Union, really? I think the answer is obviously not. Of course, we needed some small changes in our laws on related to the judiciary, but not major modifications as the leading party tried to do. So, but the most contested topic, the apple of discord, was the special section, the section for investigating criminal offences in the judiciary. So offences committed by magistrates, by judges and prosecutors. The vast majority of judges and prosecutors opposed the establishment of this institution. The council itself gave two negative advisory opinions on this. I have to admit that with a small majority of 10 to 9 that time, and this majority changed in favor of this institution later on. We have experienced the same thing with the associations of judges and prosecutors, because we have we have many associations of judges and prosecutors. We have some in 2017 when all these so-called reforms started, and most of them supported the reform, even though the majority of courts and prosecutor office opposed it. That was the reason probably for we experienced the creation of two associations which opposed just as the majority of judges and prosecutors. Why was that? This new prosecutor office was created with a declared motive to ensure the independence of judges and prosecutors, but was perceived by the judiciary as a pressure and as a possible obstacle in the fight against corruption, because there was a possibility for rerouting high corruption cases to this new created prosecutor office just by lodging a complaint, even a malicious one, an unfounded one, against a judge or a prosecutor. So these were the two major critical points. So a new pressure on judges and prosecutors, and an obstacle in the fight against corruption. In the reports of, in the opinion of Venice Commission, in the Greco report, in the cooperation and verification mechanism, we have many other points, such as this new prosecutor office is comprising 15 prosecutors. It is true that we have very few cases finalized with indictments and against judges and prosecutors and convictions as solutions, but have many complaints against judges and prosecutors. So it is difficult to imagine that 15 prosecutors could manage hundreds or thousands of complaints against judges and prosecutors. We haven't experienced a high rate of criminality among judges and prosecutors to sustain the creation of the new prosecutor office just for us. This prosecutor office is functioning just in Bucharest. So it is difficult to imagine an effective prosecutorial process from Bucharest. And actually, it is difficult to defend yourself as a judge or a prosecutor commuting between Bucharest and your court or prosecutor office. And it was also this problem with rerouting high corruption cases, and we experienced that in case of Teldrum Society, whose owner was the former president of the Chamber of Deputies, convicted for high corruption by the High Court last year, I think. And the Special Prosecutorial Office tried to reroute this file from the National Anti-Corruption Department, and the General Prosecutor, solving the negative conflict of jurisdiction, established that actually the DND is in charge with this file. So what we feared, we haven't escaped. Because in a year since its functioning, this office has two cases finalized with indictments. And in one, they obtained a definitive acquittal solution, and the other one, they dropped the charges. So 2 cases before the courts, and none of them finalized with a conviction. And another very well-known case was against the European Chief Prosecutor, and we know the solution of the High Court. It was very harsh, I would say. If we are reading the motivation of the High Court, it says that the measures against this prosecutor were not motivated, some of them were not provided by the Criminal Procedural Code, and there were not proofs against her. So it was a very harsh motivation, which proved that those fears of us, of being pressured by this new office, became reality. Speaking about the associations, it is and about the council, because we speak about, this division wasn't in the judiciary, because the judiciary as a whole opposed this. But the High Council, in a majority of 10 to 9, in this majority is the civil society and the former Minister of Justice and 6 judges, members of the section for judges. So it is difficult to understand why a part of the council supported this and the other part was against, and why a part of associations of judges supported this and others were against. And in case of associations was another debate. It was the first time, I think, when we questioned the representativity of the presidents of certain associations, asking how many members do they have, what are their statutes, what are their objectives in the statute, what is the mandate, the term of the mandate of the president, is there a limited number of mandates, so on and so forth. And in case of the council, we questioned the way these new prosecutors, and especially the chief prosecutor, was appointed, because according to the new laws, the council, the plenum of the council, was the one who appointed the chief prosecutors, yes, because we had one and another ongoing procedure, and the executive prosecutors. But the plenum could appoint just those prosecutors who were examined by a commission, compounded by 3 judges from the judges section and the prosecutor from the prosecutorial section. I don't know if you know how we are organized in the council. We are 19 members, as Professor IANCU said, but we have 2 different sections, one for judges and one for prosecutors, because our careers are separated. Still, these prosecutors are examined by a commission compounded mostly by judges, designated by the judges section, and just one prosecutor. The prosecutor section always refused to appoint a member, so always 3 judges were those who appointed these prosecutors in this new created establishment. You would say, okay, apparently there is a guarantee for the independence of the judges and prosecutors who are going to be prosecuted by this new office. But let's take a look to the chief prosecutors who were appointed by the plenum. The first one was the former deputy chief inspector, and he was sustained by the executive through an emergency ordinance to prolong his mandate. So he could have been connected to the executive power. Afterward, he was appointed as a constitutional court judge on the proposal of the leading party by the Chamber of Deputies. So another possible connection with the legislator as well. The other prosecutor who was proposed by this commission was before proposed by the Minister of Justice as the Chief Prosecutor of National Anti-Corruption Department, and was refused by the President of the Republic. So if the Minister of Justice is proposing somebody, this person is not trustworthy, but if 3 judges from the council do the same thing, this person becomes a butterfly by night, I don't know. So these are some main problems related to this section. I will try to draw the conclusions. Why we are now in this situation? Why we experiencing factionalism? I think the answer is, it is the first time when the representatives of judges and prosecutors do not represent the opinion of the majority of judges and prosecutors. This is the reason of factionalism, not just the divergent opinions on certain topics. What are the consequences? I think we have already experienced it, because recently the Parliament abrogated a provision in our law and statute related to our pensions. We tried to negotiate with the legislator, but we failed. Why? Because this division in the judiciary weakened our possibilities to defend our independence and to negotiate with other branches of government. This whole process was, those who are Romanians know very well that this whole process was accompanied by a company in a press campaign against judges and prosecutors with 2 main topics: our so-called preposterous salaries and pensions, which made the general public to hate us. And you know that great sympathy we obtained with great effort in the last 3 years was lost by night. And another topic where the cases in which we probably failed, such as high corruption cases or organized crime cases, which were prescribed before the courts, and that were not finalized with a conviction. Probably we haven't explained them enough, I don't know. But what is the consequence is this: we were isolated by the society and we weakened our possibilities to defend our independence. Are there remedies for this? Of course, knowing the causes, the first remedy would be we as the representatives of judges and prosecutors should listen to those who we represent, because I think we cannot create new institutions without the adherence of the profession to this, because they cannot be effective without that. The Venice Commission said that. I'm just paraphrasing it. Another possible remedy would be a flexible procedure for revoking the members of the Judicial Council, because the provisions in the law right now make it impossible, in my opinion. So we can stay there forever. I mean, 6 years, because they have a 6 years mandate. Another possible remedy would be to limit the attributions of the council. You said something about extending the attributions and taking the budget. I would say to limit the attributions, and the first example would be to take the High Court from the umbrella of the council itself, I mean the section for the judges, proposed some changes in the law related to the promotion of judges for the High Court, because we said that it would be better for give this attribution to the High Court. And we have some limited attributions related to that. I think there is a necessity for a larger reform of the High Court to give it an independence from the Judicial Council. As a last phrase, last memorable words, I would advise my colleagues in the future to be more involved when they elect their representatives. Thank you.
When the Commission said many things, including that ideally one should have different councils for judges and prosecutors. Judges are easy targets, especially because they cannot say much.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I have to confess that this is the first time here. Yeah, even I heard a lot of good things about the college. I have followed very attentively all speeches. Yeah, thanks a lot. All speeches, especially Mr. BENKE's speech. And let me start with an interjection, because I came from Transylvania. I think I came from the same region. Yeah, in BENKE, Raci, I made a big mistake many years ago. 24 years ago, I was prosecutor, but I know nobody is perfect. I'm a man, for this reason I'm not perfect. Since 2000, I became a judge. But this mistake will follow all my career. Fortunately, my team is dedicated to a very soft theme. It's about the Game of Thrones. No, sorry. To the play of powers. It's about the play of powers between judicial branch of power, judiciary branch of power, legislature branch of power, and the executive branch of power. UK prime ministers, you know UK, no? Even Brexit came in January, or this month, UK Prime Minister's decision to suspend Parliament for 5 weeks was unlawful, the Supreme Court has ruled. A number 10 source, on Street 10, said the Supreme Court had made a serious mistake in extending its reach to these political matters. Lawyers for the government had argued the decision to parole was one for Parliament, not the courts. But the justice disagreed, of course, unanimously, 11 judges, deciding it was justiciable, and there was no doubt that the courts had jurisdiction to decide upon the existence and limits of a prerogative power. This news was Queen's news recently, if I use the wordplay, not just in the UK, but in entire world. What is the subject matter? It is about the assertion of power, of a constitutional power of justice in an obviously positive way, even in an unwritten constitutional system based on judicial precedents such as the UK. It is not the sole example of a decision given by the judiciary whereby a conflict between the state powers is settled by the judiciary, or when a judiciary decision to change the political course of a state. In the continental system, in the vast majority of European states, conflicts between state powers, including judiciary power, falls under the constitutional court. Mr. BENKE explained more or less. To be noted as well that there are plenty of ordinary courts not just in Romania, but in other European countries, in which they are giving decisions that have a direct impact on the other two powers, executive and or legislative. A court, for example, may block through a concrete decision a major investment initiated by the government. Is it true or not? Or may change the course of a fiscal policy, such as the salaries of civil, not judges, of civil servants, or the payment of pensions, not for judges, for civil servants, through the interpretations they give to legislative acts adopted by Parliament. Parliament or to acts issued by the government in this domain or decision have dramatically changed not only the fate of some politicians, but even the political course of the other two powers. Dismissals, resignations of some politicians from executive or legislative powers, isn't true or not? Falls or changes of governments, is it true or not? The positions on the political stage due to criminal convictions in particular. There are plenty of examples. He was under former Prime Minister of Croatia. Mr. Jacques Chirac was condemned to 2 years for conflict of interest, embezzlement, and abuse of trust. Andrea here, the former Prime Minister in Romania. Mr. Dragnea, the former President of the Deputy Chamber. Petr Nekas, former Czech Prime Minister convicted of corruption. José Socrates, former Prime Minister of Portugal. Such decisions given by the justice, I'm not so sure that the image which I put in slides correspond with the right text. Such decisions given by the justice belong to the arsenal of its specific power of judiciary, and they obviously intervene in the context of the checks and balances with the other state powers of control and sometimes sanction of the decisions taken by the representatives of the executive or the legislature. I try to select because I have just 80 pages and 100 slides, but I promise that I will give you all text. Undoubtedly, the judiciary, mainly after the Second World War, has turned into an essential actor in the balance of power and in the function of the state. In this domain, CCGE a very important opinion, number 18 from 2015, the name of this opinion, adopted by the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, the position of the judiciary and its relation with the other powers of the state in a modern democracy. The attributions of the three state powers and what is the role of the judiciary in the mechanism of checks and balances, the opinion said in this way. In a democratic society, it's a responsibility of the legislator to design the legal framework in which society lies. The executive power is responsible for the administration of society in accordance with the legal framework established by the legislator. The judiciary's function is to adjudicate between members of society and the state. Frequently, the judiciary is also called upon to adjudicate on the relationship between two or even all three powers of the state. So apparently, the judge is the holder of the judiciary branch of power, and she or he, judge, a complete judge, obtains the tools and has instruments by this authority, including litigation between the state powers. Of course, these instruments are judicial decisions. But who holds the true power in the judiciary branch of power? Are you sure that a complete judge? Not the judicial council, not the judicial council in some states. Initially, the role of the councils was limited mainly to contribute to the administrative efficiency of the activity of the courts. So the natural question that arises in such a context what is the role of the judicial councils? In what context they appeared and if sometimes the public context makes for the true judiciary power to no longer be in the hands of the judges, but in the hands of such councils. The judicial councils did not appear out of thin air. They can be recorded both in the Anglo-Saxon system, for instance, in the United States in 1922, the Conference of Senior Judges, in UK in 1873, Council of the Judges of the Supreme Court, but in the continental system as well, France, 1883, Spain, 1978, Swedish Judicial Council, 1975, Kurd Service Island, 1998, and so on and so on. However, the shock felt by the impact of the Kurd orders I mentioned earlier has obviously led to a tendency to control the judiciary from the politicians located in the other two powers of the state, executive and legislative. The reaction was very prompt. The judiciary needed to be guaranteed its decision-making independence, and in particular, the judges who deliver or about to deliver judgments which have impact on the other two powers or on some politicians. Hence, the need to broaden the competence of the judicial councils in many apparently administrative spheres, and which until recently was the prerogative of executive or legislative power. So now many councils have a lot of attributions in a lot of administrative domains, like the appointment and promotion of judges, judicial training, the evaluation of judges, discipline and ethical matters, management of financial resources, and so on, the responsibility towards the public, transparency, accountability, reporting, the cooperation with other relevant bodies. I have another 10 minutes. No? Because I will try to finish my presentation. Because the accumulation of multiple attributions, horizontally and vertically, especially in key areas such as the appointment of judges and their promotion, as well as discipline, the judiciary has all the data to be perceived as the true pole of power within the judiciary. And this process, increase of the power of the judicial councils, have brought at least some negative consequences. I will finish. Thank you for your attention.
The last two speakers. The ultimate one is Laura, as I mentioned, a lawyer by training, and she now directs a highly successful NGO dealing also with judicial reform and corruption.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. It is an honor to be here tonight with you. I was invited to discuss with you the appointment procedures for top positions in the prosecution service in this country as a key element to judicial independence. But I would invite you to take a step back and think a bit about judicial independence as such, and what does that mean, and to what extent can we talk about absolute independence. Of course, the queen of the day and the queen of the recent years in Romania has been the criminal justice system. Now, if you talk with people in the system, they will tell you that the criminal justice system is a tiny bit of the justice system. And that in terms of workload, the criminal justice is just the tiny top of the iceberg. That in fact, the justice system carries on its shoulders all the inefficiencies and bad management of the administration, all the misunderstandings and fights between us, the citizens of the country. So people in the judiciary would claim that it is a bit unfair to dedicate so much attention to the criminal justice system while leaving aside as not interesting enough for the public the other spheres of justice. I'd say that the criminal justice system has the main role in the public eye because it generates the most impactful and the most sexy decisions that a court can issue. Yeah? It's about handcuffs and people going to jail and people losing money. Even though if you look closely at whether they actually lose them or not, whether they are taken away from the wrongdoers and put back into the state budget, that becomes a completely different issue. So the devil here is also in the details. Now, how do we get to an independent justice system? And you know, it's easy to say you introduce guarantees for judges and prosecutors in the law, and then everything is going to turn out perfect. With the criminal justice system, if we talk about independence, the first element is intelligence or information. How does a case start? How do we know that justice is being done in all cases and that it is done fairly and that it is done timely? So here, when we talk about the independence of the criminal justice system, we must take into account intelligence services, the independence of the police, from the political establishment, but not only, also from the mandarins in the system, right? From the people that have been there forever. And sometimes lack accountability that is maybe available for politicians, because we can actually vote them out. Whereas with people in the system, you don't even know that they exist in many cases. Administrative control bodies, anything that could be used as a source of information for the prosecutors. Because yes, in this country they do investigative activities, but based on something, they cannot create cases out of thin air. Efficient. I think the criminal justice system also has to be efficient, right? Can you claim that you have an efficient justice system, even if you look at the tiny bit of criminal justice, when you're in the top leading countries in Europe in human trafficking? Can we say that we're proud of our criminal justice system, and yet that the criminal justice system performance has nothing to do with the fact that we are one of the best providers of human trafficking in Europe? Accountability. Who's accountable? If the Romanian state, or if victims in Europe come from Romania, yet we're unable to tackle the phenomenon here, where it happens. We talked about statute of limitation being reached in court. With the help of prosecutors, I would say. It didn't just happen. Yeah. Justice for the people. Victor was saying earlier that sometimes you have provisions in the law which are obviously not fitting the reality of the society in which you live in. Now, prosecutors and the policy, the criminal policy of the country has to sense that, has to take that into account somehow, and not focus on issues that are not a priority for the country, but rather on issues that are a priority for a country, like it has been with high-level corruption for Romania for the last decade. The justice system also has to be resistant to undue influences, whether they are carrots or sticks, right? Whether they give you gifts. And I'm very tempted to enter the discussion about pensions. I will just say that in this country, there was a proposal, which is not yet eliminated from the legislation, that judges and prosecutors can retire after 20 years of professional experience. Now compare it to your countries. And the value of the pension is 80% of the gross incomes in the last year, in average. I don't think that anyone has a better deal than that. Now, does that qualify for an undue influence, being too big of a carrot? I don't know, we'll have to discuss that, but probably not here. And then sticks. A tax against the justice system. Politicians that says, you pick on me, I pick on you. You're going to investigate me and my family, I'm going to fire you. I'm going to dismantle this institution. I'm going to undermine the legislation upon which the justice system is being built. And take into account the peer pressure that comes from the system, right? You become the black sheep of the family. They pick on all of us because you have misbehaved. So it's a complicated game, and that's why I would advance the argument that in terms of appointment to the top positions in the prosecution service, this is not something that happens in a bubble. This is something that has to take all of these arguments into account and set up a procedure that works for each and every country. What works in Romania might not work in Poland, might not work in Germany, and vice versa. So what we have here is a first, I would say, that we enjoyed, cooperation between three entities. The Minister of Justice, who makes the proposal, the Council of the section of prosecutors in the Council, who gives an opinion, and the President. Now, the Council only gives an opinion, and that has been criticized throughout these years. Why don't you give a stronger voice to the prosecutorial section? Why don't we allow them to appoint these people to top positions in the prosecution service? In my opinion, we're not there yet. And I don't know that we'll ever be. Because I think the criminal policy of a country has to be somehow linked to the citizens of this country. You, as a citizen, have no connections and no ways to keep accountable a prosecutor appointed in the section of prosecutors in the Superior Council of Magistrates. Whereas you can vote out a politician. You can attach political responsibility to bad decisions, and it has been the case in this country that politicians have reached agreements under the table, and when the society found out about them, they're still carrying this on their back. Yeah? Of course they are happy, but so were we at that time. Though the opinion of the section of prosecutors in the Superior Council of Magistrates is just an opinion, presidents tend to listen to it. We'll see what happens next in Romania, because we are in the middle of an appointment process for top positions in this country. And the Minister of Justice has proposed 3 individuals for Prosecutor General, head of the DNA, head of the Organized Crime Department, and the section of prosecutors in the Council has issued 1 positive opinion on the proposed head to the DNA and 2 negative opinions on the proposed Prosecutor General and the proposed head of DCOT. We'll see how that plays in the next days, I would say. But then who gets to be proposed should come out of a process. And I insist on that because I think processes matter. And I think it matters that the Minister of Justice sets up a transparent procedure that gives equal chances to everybody. It doesn't mean that everybody is fit to be Prosecutor General or the head of the DNA. It means that if you're fit, if you think you're fit, if you think you have the background to recommend you for such a position, you should be able to apply. So transparency, equal chances, and a set of criteria. People should know what is on the table, what are they playing towards, right? So that they can come up with a management plan that shows to the decision maker what the elements of management are going to be in the proposed plan. So I would say what I care about is not that political decision is removed completely from the process, but that the pool of people from which we choose is the right one. We choose from among good people. And when I say good people, I mean good professionally, but also with integrity and with results in the past. Otherwise, we're just buying, words. I think for Romania, this is a working mechanism. This is what we've been living with, and to a certain degree, we're happy about it. Basically, we couldn't come up with anything better, right? And I personally think that it would be a step back to give it all to the section of prosecutors in the Council of Magistrates for the reasons that I explained before. Lack of accountability. What do you do when everything underperforms? Who are you going to hold accountable? There's no mechanism between the society and the Superior Council of Magistracy, the prosecutorial section. Now, because we are discussing this in the bigger picture of rule of law, I want to say 2 or 3 phrases on the new rule of law mechanism that is envisaged at the level of the EU. And I look at it with cautiousness because there are more arguments against it than there are for it. And I don't know how much appetite there is in Europe. Some say there is. With Brexit, we got rid of the Brits. They were always against. But we in Europe are more towards coming more together and setting more standards. And I somehow doubt it, especially in such a sensitive area as justice and rule of law, and we see how strongly we fight with different interpretations, as Mr. Orban would put it. Mr. Orban from Hungary. He's all in favor of rule of law, right? But maybe we have different definitions, and maybe we should go to court. And I think when we get here, it's not just upon Mr. Orban to think what will happen if the European Court is going to find against him, but it's also upon us to reflect on whether this is something that we are ready to take to court. Because what if the court decides that it's actually a large margin of interpretation for the states in regard to the organization of their judicial power, of the rules they set for judges and prosecutors. So this is very sensitive, and it may turn out to be very different. I've looked at how prosecutors are appointed in Europe. You have everything. You have, in most countries, prosecutors who are under the executive altogether. We want that in Romania. I'm a strong opponent to that idea. But if we come to go to court about it, I know that we might lose. First of all, because there's no standard. Yes, we should have an independent prosecution system, but how you get to that is everybody's business inside the country, within certain limits. And then last but not least, how do we overcome the challenge of politicization of the process? Because we know from previous processes that when the governing party in one country is a party affiliated to the political family that runs Europe at that given point, it is very difficult to act against that particular government. Also that we have countries that are more influent than others in Europe. So how do we sell this as being a fair process, equal to all, and encompassing the diversity of Europe? And at the end of the day, we don't do it because it's nice. We do it to achieve something, right? We want a better place for all of us in Europe. So the question is, are we going to get there using this mechanism? Are we going to help countries evolve on the path of more independent judicial systems, or are we going to make them more defensive about protecting what they think is theirs, and Europe should not go against it? And put it in the bigger picture of misinformation, fake news, populism, and so on. So I just a word of cautiousness. Thank you very much.
Professor Bogdan. Last but not least, justice is a public good.
Thank you. I'm quite an outsider here, and I'm going to assume that I'm going to talk like one. As Professor IANCU said, I'm a lawyer for 21 years now, and I'm also teaching in West University of Timișoara. But I'm going to speak here more as a lawyer. Maybe some sort of some tendency to generalization comes from the professorship, but I'm going to speak more as a lawyer. So the title of my presentation has just one purpose: to indicate the fact that I'm trying to approach the topic of today from the eyes of the end user of this public good, which is justice. So judicial councils, as Superior Council of Magistracy here, is not only the guarantor of independence of judiciary, but it's also the governor of the justice system, in the sense of makes the governance of the justice system. And we know very well that the career path is developed and projected by the HSM, and also the training of the magistrates and future magistrates. Now, the end users of this public service, for me, they don't have much of a say, or at least I don't perceive it like this. I don't see a big say from them in the way system works and in the discussions about the council itself and the related issues. And you, or even those that are not familiarized with the topics now, already you all realize that there was a lot of public talk during last days about HSM, about justice, anti-corruption, independence of judiciary, pressure from the executive, pressure from the politicians. So you got all that. And this is something funny. I have a lot of friends that know that I'm a lawyer, and they tell me, listen, you work in the system, we see all day in TV this stuff about anti-corruption and the independence of judiciary, and can you explain us how does it work? And I say, in my day-to-day work, I never intersect with this. I don't do criminal cases. I only do civil business cases and administrative cases, and we have very few things to do with the things that you see on TV. So, and of course, they are very disappointed. But what I mean to say with that is that I will try to focus not so much on the high politics of the council, but on the low politics of the, let's say, judiciary or justice system, or what the council would be meant to manage, to govern, if you want. And I will be pretty brief. Just one another thing to add. So lawyers have a certain, they develop somehow empirically in time a way to interact with clients, and they become some sort of translators of the problem of the systems to the clients, you know, to the end users, those that are not jurists. So they become somehow the Virgil of the Dante in the Purgatory, and from this perspective, I dare to, let's say that I talk in the name of these end users, in the names of clients, but as a lawyer. Okay, so as I said, I started being a lawyer in 1999, so I have 21 years. I knew how the system was before the reform in the mid-2000s, which included the revamping of CHIFT. And, you know, after 2 decades, I made some sort of summary of observations, let's say. And I have comparing, let's say, the old system and the system that is now. This is, of course, all anecdotal, so I don't have empirical. We don't have empirical studies here, but I'm pretty comfortable to saying it because I tested it with a lot of other colleagues. So I have these 3 positive issues of the new system compared with the old system, and 3 negative issues. So the positive issue is the stabilization in the duration of the cases. So actually what you can do now, and it was really difficult to do 20 years ago, it was to predict fairly accurately how long a case will take. So right now, in most cases I'm good at predicting fairly. And it's also a good period. It's a regular civil case in 2 degrees. It's around 1 year and a half, and I know it's a good average on European level. So that's the first good thing. The second good thing is the transparency of the files, but this is only in some places of Romania, like Inclusion and Timișoara, we have this. So direct access to your file with an electronic password, and this is really very useful and helps a lot with managing the case. And the third thing, which is also more general, now the perception of corruption of judiciary in lawyers' eyes, if you want, decreased radically, like in the last 10 to 15 years, probably linked to the insulation of the future judges in the National Institute of Magistracy. So really, this is a big progress and a very positive issue. Now, negative issues. I saw, and that was confirmed by many colleagues, as I said, less sophistication of judges in substantive law issues than before. So before you might find a judge that was paying attention to nuances, paying attention to facts, I mean substantive law issues, issues that are in dispute in the case. While right now the focus is so much on procedural issues, so everybody is obsessed with procedural issues. It was even a war between the Constitutional Court and Court of Cassation on reviews in cases with an object over a certain amount, and it was a lot of energy spent there for something that was actually, the only stake was probably to have not to have the dockets all full or something like that. And it was really difficult to explain to the clients that, so, I mean, we work with technicalities, but that was such a technicality that even I was not able to understand why we discuss so much about it. So it's a lot of focus on procedure, for me not enough focus on the substantive law. And this is something, it sounds strong, but I'm prepared to, I'm ready to say it. I think on substantive law issues, best lawyers are more sophisticated and better prepared than best judges. So it's not a question of personal qualities, this is precisely, but it looks like that. Probably it's because they have more time, they have a better research apparatus, but this is a perception. The second negative issue is difficulties of judges in dealing with discretion issues. So you have this summary procedure, summary proceedings, provisional measures, decisions where you don't make your regular judicial syllogism, facts, norm, decision. So there you need to assess, you need to balance, you need to strike a balance. Now there, very rarely you have the wise judges that 20 years ago you might find them. You know, the judge that understood the practical stake in the case and was able to strike a balance between the competing values, not so much on legal text, but on understanding why is that case for. And last thing, which is actually not of very broad interest, but I think it's nice and ironical, as we discussed about the pressures from the executive on the judiciary. But let me tell you that in taxation cases, there is a perfect alignment between the executive and the judiciary. So the taxation case law, Romanian taxation case law is very, very much pro-state. So yeah, that was really just some brief notes from, let's say, a lawyer after 20 years of work in both systems, if you want. And just to finish, really from outside, as an outsider, the public agenda of the CHIFT, this is maybe also a question of communication. But it really looks so much like the agenda of the politicians. So, okay, we try to insulate judiciary from political or the other powers that are more exposed to political. And in the end, it looks from outside like it's the same agenda. And somehow, you know, I would like that, I don't know, these end users, these clients of mine, or clients of the lawyers in Romania, somehow the CSM should connect also with them in order, you know, to have a sort of feedback from the practice, but from the grass level, not so much from the ivory tower. Thank you.
We have about half an hour give or take, for questions and answers. The floor is open.
I don't know if the comments are procedurally allowed or only questions. Well, somehow didn't really want to ask a question. Some very short remarks. I'm a judge at the Court of Appeal. My name is Bogdan, Court of Appeal here in Bucharest. First of all, I want to say to Mr. BOJIN that I read his study about the judicial system, and his assessments today confirms that he's a very fine analyst of the judicial system and what doesn't work in the judicial system. It's true that judges tend to be rather formalists and hide behind procedure, and they shy away from things like assessments, like weightings, putting a balance between different legitimate interests. Second of all, I wanted to say something about the Judicial Council. I grew somehow critic towards this institution, towards the CHIFT. It was created basically to guarantee the judicial independence, but now we have a bigger issue, and maybe how to protect the independence of the courts in front of the Judicial Council itself. And the Judicial Council is much too powerful, it has a lot of prerogatives, it's too big, 19 people, it's much too much. They have a lot of time, they don't do anything else, and I think this is one explanation of why they are arguing so much between each other. To be very honest, this is empirically my impression. And there is also a tendency that I think the structure is somehow bad, because this is the third council, which is very disappointing, which was composed by very promising people, like Horatius, which was also president in the other council. We had very big hopes of the other council, but I think the other council disappointed us even more than this one, because we had much higher expectations. So I think there is a problem in the structure, and there is also some tendency of self-replication, because who knows who appoints court presidents? The council. Who is appointed court president? Right now, I think it is appointed who the council likes to appoint, and these are the future members of the council. So we'll have, basically, the new council will be the people which the council now selects, and I don't think this is judicial independence. And third, don't want to be too long, some word about the Constitutional Court. The jurisprudence which was mentioned is very fine, and there are very good points in it, but there are also some tendencies in the jurisprudence of the last years which are making me worry very much if the Constitutional Court is rather a guarantee of judicial independence and balance between the different powers, or is itself becoming the biggest powers of all, like in Iran. Now we have this council of ayatollahs, which invalidates laws, invalidates public functions. I think this is also a big danger, and it's very important that there exists some judicial self-restraint, also by the courts, it's true, but also by the Constitutional Court, because I think it's a very big step between what happened in 2008, when the Constitutional Court said the High Court of Cassation misinterpreted the law was obvious, but we do not invalidate the decision of the High Court, because we do not have this prerogative. This is what the Constitutional Court said by then. I mean, it wasn't a discrimination case, maybe I think it was not the case you mentioned. It was not the case. It was about rulings regarding anti-discrimination law, which it was basically a ruling by which judges increased their own salary. And the Constitutional Court said this ruling is wrong, the Constitution was breached, but we do not have the power to invalidate the ruling itself. And now in 2019, the court, in very harsh words, tells the High Court that is interpreted purposely wrong a legal disposition which was not clear in my opinion, and gives further instructions that all decisions rendered under these conditions are void. And I think this is something the Constitutional Court under our system is not allowed to do. This is my opinion. It's far overstretching its prerogatives by invalidating decisions and giving instructions on how to proceed with ongoing cases. We are not in Germany. This is not the German Constitutional Court. Maybe we wanted it to be. That would require also other changes, I think. But it is not. And I think it is very important that also, of course, the judges themselves, the courts, but also that the Constitutional Court and the Council have a bigger awareness about the limits of their own powers. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Liv, you raised a topic that I'm working on currently, so I wanted not to say anything, just listen, but I want...
It's much better to comment on the...
Yeah, I want just to... I just want to build a little bit on your argument and then put it for discussion. I know that the Constitutional Court does not decide like the whatever, because they are asked to decide. They do not decide by themselves. Somebody is asking them to decide. And then the court decides because it has to decide. Otherwise, it won't be a court. So, the idea would be to get a little bit behind that, that stuff and start a discussion about why so many times the court was asked to judge, since 2005 at least, in these conflicts of competence. And then the idea is that, okay, it was asked to judge this kind of conflicts of competence because somehow political branches and judiciary in the same time cannot agree anymore, cannot negotiate anymore. Therefore, they cannot reach a compromise, which would be better, let's say, from a political point of view. So it asked the court to decide. And when the court decides, any possibility of negotiation disappears because there is only one decision, and that decision should be taken into consideration, and it's mandatory. Therefore, it creates more and more, how to say, down to heel, a lot of problems down to heel. Because nobody will be happy with one decision. Somebody will be happy with the decision, but not everybody, because there is no negotiation there. There is just a decision. So, but the court has to decide. My question for the court will be, or for the debate, wouldn't it be better to be a little bit self-restrained on these issues? Because even though you have to decide more rarely, not so often as the political branches of government or also the judiciary branch of government wants you to decide. In fact, I tend to like the Constitutional Court, and I really much appreciate what the Constitutional Court does as an institution and what is representing the Constitutional Court for a country and for a state. But the idea is that how can you intelligently manage the political and judiciary branches of government to renegotiate and get by their own to compromise?
Is there, perhaps we could go around the other seat, certainly does. Go around.
I'm also a big supporter of negotiations, and I think we're just building up fences when you argue everything to court. When you take everything to court, you basically limit the growth of a state and the development of a state. You ask judges, and they must answer, to predefine how the society will look like tomorrow, and I think that's wrong. I mean, everything goes to the Constitutional Court, from yelling and screaming, to calling each other's names, to someone says something about someone else, to a report, an evaluation report was bad or not good enough, or someone should be revoked, a law is encompassing, is too encompassing or less encompassing. I think everybody takes a chance because the possibility is out there. And rather than negotiating in this country, we tend to say, I'll take you to court, you'll see I'm on the right position. But I think there's more to it than what meets the eye. So the question is, why did it increase so much in recent years? And my feeling, and again, there's no empirical data on which I can support this, and this is not nice, when you're talking to researchers, I think it has to do with modernization also. I think when a country changes the paradigm in which it operated until then, there's more heat in the society, and that heat has to go somewhere. So all these constitutional conflicts, they come out of something. We've seen big societal earthquakes in the last 15, 20 years in Romania. But we do live in a different country than 20 years ago. It's a profoundly different country. And in fairness, when we say rule of law, anti-corruption, so and so, politicians, in their own words, which might not be as nice as this, say, who told you so? Who decided that? Who had said that Romania is going to become a different country? And, you know, their underlying argument is, we didn't decide it. We were just window dressing, and now you're taking it for real. And you're forcing us to live by the standards we announced, but we never meant that. And the society doesn't want that. This is what they say. And I think from a political perspective, we must pay attention to that too, because we tend to look at everything with our legal lens, but the society is much more than that. And you know, us lawyers, we can agree that a certain article in the Constitution should be read in a certain way. It doesn't mean that we hold, you know, the monopoly on truth in this country. So I think we also need to open up to the other areas of life and understand that it's not only about laws and articles and judges. It's also about what we want to become, what we want to be, rather than who's right and who's wrong.
First of all, I want to answer to Mr. Zidaru. Yeah, so there were two decisions in 1222 per 2008 and 838 per 2009. In the first decision, the situation was the following. In front of the Bucharest Court of Appeal, the presidential administration made there was a referral from the Court of Appeal to the Constitutional Court upon the appointment of a person as general. What are the conditions which has to be met? The Constitutional Court said in that case, there are no legal conditions, but it's at the discretion of the President. So the President may or may not appoint that certain person as general. The Court of Appeal obeyed to the decision of the Constitutional Court, but at the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court overturned the Court of Appeal decision, saying that, okay, this decision is for the future, but when the request was filled at the court, there was no Constitutional Court decision, so the Supreme Court obliged the presidential administration to appoint that certain person as general. In this context, the Constitutional Court had to, so the President of the Republic referred a constitutional conflict to the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court said, yes, it is a conflict between the two branches of power, so the judicial power and the President, the executive power. And that is the first decision when the Constitutional Court says expressly what is the constitutional behavior that has to be followed by the President and the court, the High Court. There is something like, because was sued in that certain trial, the presidential administration, the judgment of the Supreme Court cannot be opposed to the President because it is opposable only to the presidential administration. And that was the case in 2008. In 2009, there was a referral from the President of the Republic saying that the Supreme Court acted as a legislator because in two cases, two decisions on the unitary application of law, it created norms. In that case, the Constitutional Court said it is conflict, but I cannot oblige the other courts that have pending trials, processes, to apply my decision because it would be, let's say, a kind of appeal against the decision of the Supreme Court. So it was, let's say, the Constitutional Court had to respect the anti-discrimination, because if it would apply the Constitutional Court decision in the pending cases, that would mean on the salarization, because of course this case related to the salarization of magistrates, it would mean that a part of the magistrate would have a salary because former court decisions, but the other part of the system would do not have those supplements at the salaries. It was a supplement of 50% and 15%, so 65% at stake at that moment. Moving to the second part of your question, I will answer to Bogdan. If we analyze the court case law, we see that between 2007 and 2010, we are moving to a judicial activism of the Constitutional Court. Because in 2007, everybody was asking, where is the Constitutional Court? Well, what are your more important decisions? This. But till 2007, we do not have a very important, let's say, decisions. One or two. But from 2007 to 2010, there is a clear new positioning of the Constitutional Court. And one of the main reasons, because of this judicial activism, is that the constitutional revision from 2003. We had new competence, so legal dispute of constitutional nature. In 2010, we have this attribution of reviewing parliamentarian decisions. And step by step, the Constitutional Court had more attributions, more competence, and of course, we had developed these competencies, and the perception is now that we are in a judicial activism, in a constitutional judicial activism. You ask, how can we temper this activism? Because if we temper this judicial activism, the political actors, we can negotiate between them, and not always have the Constitutional Court stating that. Okay. And a final remark: the Constitutional Court has to state the effects of its decisions and its legal dispute of constitutional nature. No other court can know and put it down what is a Constitutional Court decision. If you have this decision in the Constitutional Court decision, it's this effect, it's very good, I think.
If the other panelists want to say very quick words, the haiku, think haiku. Yeah?
Just briefly to respond to some comments. Indeed, the Council needs to look more closely to user satisfaction, to the quality of justice as a public service. We do have some good models in Netherlands, for example. The issue is the composition of the Council. And we have 16 members which are elected magistrates. So what the Venice Commission is saying in their report, the risk of corporatism actually is happening in our Council. So it's the only one reality which matters during our discussions and debates, with some exceptions, is the concern of what our colleagues would say, even though it's misinterpreting what the colleagues are saying or they are waiting for. When it's about litigants, when it's about beneficiary of judicial system as a final user, it's no way. So the risk of corporatism indeed is there. And related to the corporatism, another two remarks. Indeed, when I mentioned that I think the prosecutor section of the Council needs to have a more important role in the appointment, but not the only role in the appointment. I would see balance and to force cooperation between a Minister of Justice, which can be held accountable, and the Judicial Council prosecutor section. It might be a way not to be a consultative opinion, but rather an opinion which has some force, which will force the two authorities to work. And last comment, which actually is happening in Romania, but not in Romania, in Europe, it's seen justice start to play a more preeminent political role. And Horatius mentioned about that. What's important is to not misuse their power, their independence, in playing political games.
Just a short answer to what Victor said before. Yes, we are asking ourselves what would our colleagues said, but not in disciplinary cases, not imagine that, but in the cases of strategies related to the judiciary, or in cases of regulations related to the judiciary. And now I'm answering to review. We have a lot of things to do. There is not a part-time job. It would be impossible for us to be judges or prosecutors in courts or prosecutor offices and members of the council in Romania, I mean, in the same time, because we have a lot of attributions. And you know, at first, before I was a member of the council, I had the same thoughts as you know, because we've been friends for many years, so we know each other very well. But being on the other side of the barricade, I can answer, it's a very difficult job. It's a job you are not prepared before, and you have to learn it. It's not our task as judges in the courts to draft regulations and develop strategies related to the whole judiciary system. This is the reason for we need two types of judges in the council, presidents or former presidents of courts, because they have this strategic mind, but also judges who haven't been presidents before, because sometimes there is a limitation. Thinking just in the limit of the court, it doesn't allow you to think outside the box. So it is good to have judges without any leadership positions before, like me, speaking pro domo, because maybe in some cases we can give another input. So there is a need for both types of judges, and it is not impossible to be a member of the council if you haven't been a president before. And you know that I encourage many of my colleagues to apply for this position, and I'm still encouraging it. That was my last famous words in my presentation. Thank you.
Just some words. Sorry, because I disappoint you. I will do the best in the future. He's a friend of mine, of course, and he came from my region to review. Very briefly, about the constitutional, constitutional code. The same thing, I think that it's the same with the Judicial Council, not just in Romania, but in this part of Europe. Who has little power wants even more power. I call this kind of phenomenon glutton syndrome. Glutton is a person who eats and drinks excessively or voraciously. And I agree with you on this matter, and with Mr. Bogdan partially. And I've noticed, Mr. Mercator, that you more or less say the same, but because if you compare decisions delivered by the courts 15 years ago with the decisions that has delivered now by the Romanian Constitutional Court, I think we can have a kind of image. And I haven't agree, Mr. You are a specialist in this kind of. But what I want to emphasize, this is a real danger, not just for the Constitutional Court, but for the Judicial Council and for other institutions. The gluttony syndrome.
Let's thank the colleagues for taking time of busy schedules. continue with the drinks. The other room.